about what we're going to be sort of looking at in upcoming tonight and in upcoming sessions is something called the seven factors of awakening. And we're going to progress through each one way or another. The seven factors of awakening in, in the Pali Canon, the text on mindfulness, the sort of authoritative teachings of the Buddha on how to practice mindfulness is called Satipatthana Sutra. It's basically Satipatthana means foundations for mindfulness, right? Sati, mindfulness, and Patthana, foundations. So it's the foundations of mindfulness. And it's a very short text. It's actually not long. But in it, the Buddha outlines very plainly, very clearly how we practice mindfulness, right? So, um, at the end of this text, well, before we get to the end of the text, what is it that he focuses on? And we've kind of done a little bit of introduction to this over the last few weeks. But the first foundation of mindfulness is meditating on the body, is cultivating mindfulness on the physical body, which includes our breathing. It includes the various parts of the body as well as what are called the four elements. So meditating on ourselves as earth, water, fire, and air or space, which also includes breath and such. So that the first foundation is that. Then we move into mindfulness of feelings, and feelings are things like: are we feeling restless? Are we agitated? Are we feeling peaceful and just sort of loving and generous to ourselves in the moment or to others? Or is there some distortion in the way? So we're kind of attuning in those moments to how we are doing. We're becoming mindful of our feeling states. And then the third foundation is mind. And under mind is our thoughts, cognitions, as well as emotional things that may be arising for us, sensations, triggering thoughts, thoughts triggering sensations. That then leads us into the fourth foundation of mindfulness, which are called dharmas or dhammas in the Pali language. And this really means, often it's translated into mental objects, but here dharmas really refers to insights. It refers to things that we are learning about ourselves by practicing mindfulness on the first three foundations, on body, feelings, mind. And then as we kind of get to know the transient nature of our experiences, that these things are in constant flux, we gain some insight into the nature of mind as that which is ever changing, and insight into the nature of mind below what is changing, which is this sort of continuum of present, sort of open awareness that just abides below all of the gross level experiences. And so when we're able to sort of settle into that quality for any length of time, that's when we are sort of in a deeper state of mindfulness or meditation. Now, as part of insights, um, the Buddha teaches us that there are hindrances to being mindful, to our meditation practice. Again, last week we kind of quickly went through them. The five hindrances, briefly, are attachment or sort of clinging to pleasure, things that are pleasant or things we want, things we're craving, including wanting our meditation to be a certain way, right? So we can get all caught up in things, as well as a daydream or sort of this pleasant kind of balmy breeze we talked about last week. The balmy breeze that sets the sailboat sail off one side without our knowing it. We usually end up falling asleep. um, so that's the first hindrance. The second is aversion, or sometimes it's called ill will, but that kind of negativity, that kind of resistance or anger or harshness in our experience, which actually is a form of attachment. Um, it just feels different. It looks a little different, and dealing with aversion can feel different as well. So getting beyond it. So aversion, attachment, aversion. The third is agitation, restless. Remember the wind that comes from that one side of the sailboat and just knocks the sail off center. Um, so an agitated, anxious, restless mind, a constant ruminating, These are all very normal, natural things that we all experience when we're practicing mindfulness. They kind of come and go, either in succession, God forbid, they all happen at once, right? That's a fun thought, isn't it? Um, so, attachment, aversion, restlessness or agitation. Then the next one is what's called sloth or drowsiness, falling asleep, or laxity. That's another way to say it. We kind of lose the center and just drift off. So if you've had any of these hindrances before, if you've tried to practice meditation or mindfulness, we are all going through these things at some point. So not to worry, this is actually quite normal. This is the state of the distracted, clinging, and averse mind from one moment to the next until it settles naturally. This habitual just process of energy that's happening. Um, the fifth hindrance, which I didn't mention yet, is doubt. Doubt. After all of that we've just been through with the monkey mind and the elephant mind and the monkey riding the elephant mind and the hopefully the elephant isn't riding the monkey mind, but anything's possible. We can easily settle into a place where we're just feeling like this is hopeless. I am hopeless. I cannot meditate. I cannot be mindful. I cannot hold my focus on anything. Um, and so it's that kind of confusion that arises, that doubt, that sense that there's nothing to this, or I can't do it, or what Chris is telling us is not really possible. He's asking too much. So those are five hindrances, and they all arise and disperse on their own. That's the thing. We don't have to try to control them or do anything about them, but we recognize them. And this is part of that fourth foundation of insights. We get to know how the mind is arising on its own and how these habits sort of play out. And when we're able to sort of maintain just this very light center of equilibrium in our consciousness, we kind of just can go along on the ride, but we're stable and we're centered. We're restfully alert. That is a good place to be. It's a wholesome place to be. Yeah. So no matter what comes, we're still able to sort of pay attention, continue to breathe, allow the senses of our body to um, support being present in a mindful way, regardless of what comes. And it takes a little practice. It takes a lot of practice in some cases. So, and every day is different. Now, here, then at the end of this fourth foundation of mindfulness are these things called the seven factors of awakening. Now, at the very beginning of the Satipatthana Sutra, of this text on mindfulness, the Buddha says something very interesting. Those of you who've taken my extension school class are going to remember, you might even know now. So if you're grinning, it means you may remember. But he says something very interesting. And we're often not taught this in mindfulness based classes or stress reduction. But he says that sati, or a mindfulness, is the only thing you need to awaken, to awaken to the state of nirvana, which is basically all you need for enlightenment are these teachings on mindfulness. That's a pretty radical thing to say, given the simplicity of the teachings. Um, and in a very methodical, laid out way, he says, and here's how we do it. So after saying this, that sati is the only thing, satipatthana, the foundations of mindfulness, are all you need to recognize, to awaken, to realize the unconditional state, which is really what nirvana means here. It means a state of mind that is beyond conditioned. It means that we are not reacting, we're not perceiving things through the filters, through projections, through conditions, through our reactive habits, through concepts, through patterns, but we're simply abiding in a state where awareness is simply self evident. It is reflexive, it is self evident, and there is no need to be reactive. There is no need um, to, there's no need to suffer. We don't have that need anymore in that moment that we are practicing. We've settled so much that we encounter this foundation of mind that is bright, clear, always settled, and unaffected by all the other habitual patterns of mind. And so this is what he means. So to practice sati or mindfulness, This is all we need to sort of open up to this quality of mind, this underlying state of tranquility. And at the end of this text, he says, and there are 7 factors of awakening that we want to pay attention to. Okay? So these 7 factors are things that we're going to talk about tonight. The first one. And briefly, what are those 7 factors? So I'm going to read you directly from the sutra, if I can find it here on all my things here on my desktop. So once we have established this sense of openness, of kindness, of mindful presence, it's gentle and settled, and we're abiding there. The Buddha tells us this. He says, in regard to dhammas, remember dhammas is that, this is the Pali word for dharma, which is the Sanskrit word for insights. One abides contemplating insights in terms of the 7 factors of awakening. So, how does one, in regard to insights, abide contemplating dhammas in terms of the 7 awakening factors? Here, the first one is mindfulness itself. So, if the mindfulness awakening factor is present in the practitioner, one knows there is the mindfulness awakening factor in me. If the mindfulness awakening factor is not present, one knows there is no mindfulness awakening factor in me. One knows how the unarisen mindfulness awakening factor can arise and how the arisen mindfulness awakening factor can then be further perfected by development. So here are 4 things that he's telling us. 1, just know if it's there. Am I mindful now? I am mindful. If you're not, then notice that too. There is no mindfulness in me now. And you also know, regardless, if there is no mindfulness factor there, you know how it can arise. You know what to do, basically, to sort of bring this into being, the state of mindfulness. And you then know, the 4th thing is, how to further cultivate it. So these are the 4 stages. Then he goes on, and largely this refrain is similar. We see this a lot in Buddhist texts where um, there's a lot of repetition around knowing something is there, seeing it if it's not there, or experiencing something as pleasant, experiencing something as unpleasant, or experiencing it as neutral, neither pleasant nor unpleasant. And so these refrains repeat over and over again. So the rest of the factors, tonight we're going to focus a bit more on the first one of mindfulness. But he continues to tell us that the second factor of awakening is what has been translated as the investigation of Dhamma's awakening factor. What does that mean? It means inquiry. Okay, that's perhaps a little simpler to get. So let's use that instead of the investigation of Dhamma's awakening factor. Let's say the inquiry factor. Getting to know more deeply with curiosity, with interest, what your experience is without judgment. So mindfulness sets this up, the sense of abiding in a non judgmental, open awareness, a simple embodied presence that isn't rejecting anything, it's not clinging to anything, but is looking deeply, as Thich Nhat Hanh says, looking deeply into what you're experiencing and getting to know it better. So that's what inquiry is. And so he says, if inquiry awakening factor is present in one knows there is inquiry, the inquiry awakening factor in me. If it is not present, one knows there is no inquiry awakening factor in me. And one knows how the unarisen inquiry factor can arise and how the arisen inquiry factor then can be perfected by development. So again, here, inquiry, investigation of your experiences, of your insights, Are they there? Are you experiencing sort of insights at all, or let alone an interest, a curiosity into what's happening? Or is that not present? But I know how to cultivate a sense of interest, a sense of curiosity, and I then know how to perfect it. Now, remember, these are awakening factors. It doesn't mean these are easy, or hey, we can all do this now that we know them. But it's part of the sort of cultivation process of mindfulness practice that we rarely hear about. And it's also something that we may sort of cotton onto a particular one of these, such as inquiry. If something is bothering us, if we're sitting and something is just not right, you say, I think I need the inquiry factor here. And I'm going to bring that into this quality that I'm experiencing only in a non judgmental way that allows me to really get to know more deeply what's going on without judgment and without fear. Sometimes that's the hard part, but we can talk about that again. So then he goes on to the third. I'm just going to name them now. Basically, the refrain, as I said, is the same on each of these. So we have mindfulness is the first one, investigation of dhammas or inquiry. The third one is energy. This is an interesting one. Energy here meaning, do we have kind of the inspiration to sit? Are we just so hyper in our bodies or our minds? Is there too much energy that we can't settle? Maybe we had too much coffee. I try to have one coffee a day, and if I have two, I notice it when I'm sitting. It's like, oh, okay, here's energy. There's an overabundance here. Okay, I get it. And it was a double shot. Okay, shouldn't do that next time before I sit. Yeah. So, energy. And it also implies a balance, it implies equilibrium. So, if I don't have enough, I'm going to be sort of carried away by the elephant. I'm going to just fall asleep. And if I'm awake enough, uh, I can actually stay lucid, stay wakeful, and yet very relaxed. So that balance is what he's talking about here. Balance between being deeply restful and also wakeful. Um, the fourth is joy. Joy. This is a nice one. Joy here meaning not just sort of a hedonic joy that relies on any kind of stimulus driven pleasure. It's not this sort of fleeting joy, but it's a deeper sense of contentment arising out of the practice. In fact, it opens to us as a result of practice. Our view changes, our standpoint changes. That joy here is natural joy and it's lasting. It's almost a sense of contentment, well being, appreciation, gratitude, and we don't have to work at it. It's just sort of there, it's self evident. And then moving on, tranquility is the next one. A sense of serenity, of settling into a peaceful way of abiding in any moment. You know, if tranquility is there, this one's pretty easy to tell. Am I tranquil right now? Or is there no tranquility in me? And do I know how tranquility can arise? Maybe we're aware if I just take a deep breath and breathing out, I just imagine myself relinquishing tension, stress. I give myself permission to let go of it. And I settle into the present, which is hopefully a quiet space where you're able just to hear your breath, feel it through your senses, and so on. And tranquility maybe then arises. A lot of these will arise naturally, so we don't have to strive or try to work for them. Right? So tranquility, and we'll, as I said, we'll cover each of these in their own, on their own. Um, and then the sixth is concentration. What is the nature of my concentration here? And term is, I think, I was just talking about this today, that samadhi, this word samadhi, that is often in Buddhism translated as concentration, it's a bit of a poor translation. Concentration here is really not so much about striving to focus at all, but it's more about an openness, an effortlessness, and a stability in attention where we can choose to just let our attention rest on a particular object of awareness, such as breathing, or maybe it's a visualization, or we're meditating on the heart as being like a moon if the mind is restless. This is in Tibetan Buddhism, we have this often. If your mind is just going crazy with itself, is drop into your heart and meditate on your heart as being like a disc, a full moon disc on a clear, crisp night. And for the same token, if you're falling asleep, meditate on your heart as a bright sun in the early morning, a crisp early morning sky. Um, so concentration here, it's not just about focus, but it's also about the quality of being aware here. And so, um, yeah, we notice if we are able, if we're concentrating in any moment, we know it. If we're not, we know it. And we know how to arise concentration and also to perfect it through development. And then the last one, the seventh one, equanimity. Equanimity. A sense of neutrality, a sense of meeting all things with an even mind so that we're not just constantly caught up in the pendulum of grasping and wanting and needing this and rejecting and hating and not wanting that. This dualistic sort of back and forth that characterizes what we call the samsaric existence, the cycle of pleasure pain through our lives, of seeking and craving and rejecting and pushing away. um, so equanimity is that kind of balance, that equilibrium in our attention, where all things are pretty much equal. One thought is very much like another. This thought here that may feel negative is simply thought, and it's impermanent. This thought over here is of something really good, like a great piece of dark chocolate. It's just a thought too. There's no preference. It's just equanimous openness of a mind. This, all of these factors are indicators of the natural underlying nature of mind itself. That's why we're not fabricating something that doesn't already exist, but rather these qualities are already present, inherently present within what we call our own Buddha nature or our own underlying bhavanga, which is that quality of consciousness that is very subtle and very open, very free already. So we're just sort of reaching into that place, allowing it to arise naturally rather than changing anything or having to fabricate anything. So, okay, so I realize I'm talking quite a bit here. Um, so I've already kind of been through what the Buddha teaches us about mindfulness. Um, Mindfulness is has four foundations, and it's number one because it is a foundation for the other factors too. So if we rely on mindfulness through our practice, mindfulness of body, of breathing, of the elements, of our feelings, and then our thoughts and our emotions, and then mindfulness of the insights we get of into this habitual mind that's constantly restless, and that which is underlying this open, clear, sort of still, silent presence that is the underlying nature of mind or awareness of mindful presence, really. And we come to know that we can find balance through practice. Um, then we've established ourselves in mindfulness. Yeah.